is May 27th, 2025, and I am Ann Kim, a contributing editor at Washington Monthly, joined today by politics editor Bill Scher and executive editor for digital, Matt Cooper. Hey, good morning, guys.
Good
Hey,
morning.
morning, Ann.
I hope you guys had a good Memorial Day weekend.
All
Very
good.
lovely weather.
I'm sure none of us had quite as exciting a weekend as Donald Trump, or as exciting as a week coming up. So let's just plunge right into what's happening. Of course, the big news is going to be the one big beautiful bill and its fate in the Senate. What do you guys see happening? Bill, in particular, this has been an obsession of yours for the past few weeks. So, what are you looking for this week, and what do you think the Senate is going to do to the beautiful bill that Trump has put together with the House?
Well, there are people in the Senate that want to pull it in opposite directions. So it's still not a done deal. You have people like Ron Johnson who went out there saying he doesn't cut spending enough. You have people who are more moderate like Murkowski and Collins that are worried about the severity of the health care cuts. Uh, and there are other senators who uh, want to uh, not maintain, but sort of delay the phase out of the clean energy tax credits, even though that's not necessarily something you associate with Republicans. But a lot of red states get that money, and one of the concessions made to the far right in the House was to speed up the phase out of those credits. So those are a few of the issues that are in play here that have to make you pause for assuming this is going to be uh, a fait accompli. But having said that, the fact that it did get through the House does uh, lend a lot of credence to the argument that they're going to find a way. They can't. Uh, there's a certain logic to Republicans can't let the Trump tax cuts from the first term expire and jack up tax rates on most everybody. That's too unpalatable for most of them. So even if it's awkward and unpopular and uncomfortable, they're going to find a way to compromise. This is what happened with the Freedom Caucus. They talked a big game going into the final vote, and then they caved, even though it doesn't. It's not even a remotely deficit neutral bill like they had demanded on. Uh, but so if you want to bet, you bet on that happening, but there's still a long way to go.
But Matt, this
That's
is
about right.
something.
Yeah,
y-
go ahead.
Yeah, I want to raise an issue that you've raised, Matt, which is the bond market. You've said in the past that you're keeping an eye on the bond market and wondering what role that's going to play. Moody's rating agency downgraded U.S. credit from a AAA to a AA1. That was the last good credit rating for the United States. And so now we are kind of in the league with other countries, not like Canada, not like Germany, which still has sterling AAA credit. What role do you
Right.
think that is going to play in the certainty of a deal?
I suspect not as much. I think the bond market, like the equities markets, are responding more to what's happening on the trade. You know, Trump's erratic on again, off again trade policy, and so I think they've kind of factored in already that this is going to pass. And I tend to agree with Bill that most of the hydraulic pressure is for this thing to pass. No Republican wants to have the, blood on their hand and a chalk outline on the ground if this thing dies. I mean, who wants to endure Trump's wrath? Or, as Bill said, be responsible for seeing taxes go up. So I could see it being a real, perils of Pauline kind of road to the finish here. I mean, even if the Senate passes, then they got to, hack it out with the House. So I think we got a ways to go, but I'd be surprised if they don't make it. And they do have a little more wiggle room in the Senate with, they could lose three Republicans and use JD Vance to tie. So I think they could, give a couple of those guys the wiggle room they might need. So, you know, the fact that, as Bill said, they got it out of the House, I think it's really the big deal.
And what advice for Democrats do you guys have on how to play this? And in particular on the Medicaid cuts. One thing that's happening is that Mike Johnson and others in the House are framing the Medicaid cuts as really about taking away Medicaid from people who don't deserve it. You know, they say that they're limiting it to people who earn it by working and getting the able-bodied, quote unquote, people off the rolls. Um,
Yeah.
how effective do you think that argument is, number one? And then number two, if you were a Democrat, how do you respond to that?
Well, let's quote Mike Johnson verbatim here. I have this in front of me. So he said this on CNN on Sunday. Um, uh, the number of Americans who are affected are those that are entwined in our work to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse. So, what do I mean by that? You got 1.4 million illegal aliens on Medicaid. Medicaid is not intended for non US citizens, it's intended for the most vulnerable populations of Americans, which is pregnant women and young single mothers, the disabled, the elderly. They're protected in what we're doing because we're preserving the resources for those who need it most. You're talking about 4.8 million able bodied workers, young men, for example, who are on Medicaid and not working. They're choosing not to work when they can. That is called fraud. They are cheating the system. When you root out those kinds of abuses, you save the resources that are so desperately needed by the people who deserve it and need it most. So there's a lot. So that's the quote.
Okay.
There's a lot to unpack in that. So number one, 1.4 million illegal aliens on Medicaid. That is not true. Yeah, I mean, it's not just that Medicaid is not intended for non-U.S. citizens; they're not eligible for it.
Correct.
What's
Yeah.
actually happening here is that there are state-funded programs, not in all states, but in some states, that allow for undocumented access. And what the bill would do would be to cut the state's Medicaid reimbursements if they have a program like that. So it's indirect. I mean, again, this is maybe too wonky a point for Democrats to use in their favor, but just for factual, just for accuracy's sake, what Mike Johnson said there is not true.
Yeah.
The other part there, he says, well, it's intended for pregnant women, uh, 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 the elderly, the disabled. That is also not true. Medicaid has been expanded to include people, including young men, who may not be working. I mean, Medicaid was initially intended for the unemployed, and the people who are on it, and so it's been expanded to cover people who do work already. And those who aren't working tend to be like you're genuinely unemployed, or that they want to work and they can, or they may be going to school, or they may be taking care of elderly people in their family and sort of not easily able to work. It's not just people being loafers. Uh, and as Steve Bannon has pointed out, that includes a lot of MAGA voters. He's still young men, a lot of them voted for Trump. So waste, fraud, and abuse are people who are cheating the system. These are people who are not cheating the system. This is how the law is currently structured, that they want to change and take away healthcare from people who currently have it. And so Johnson could try to sell it this way, but there are real human beings who are going to be caught in this, legislative crossfire, who are going to speak out, and Democrats can help elevate those people and give them platforms. That's one big way Democrats could go fight this and make it much painful for Republicans to actually go forward.
Yeah, yeah. I want to add a couple other points on the fact-checking part of this too. Um, First of all, federal law requires that emergency rooms treat people who show up. So yes, you have undocumented people showing up at emergency rooms with life-threatening emergencies. Is Johnson really talking about denying care to people who might have been in a car accident or had some other terrible injury happening to them? Who knows? But it certainly kind of sounds that way.
I don't think the bill of structure would get in the way of the emergency care part of it, because you're not enrolled in Medicaid. To
It is
get
Medicaid
that
money that uses
care.
that, though. It is
Yeah,
Medicaid money that goes toward
yeah. I
that, and
mean,
they do
maybe
count it toward undocumented
right,
care.
yes,
Right. Well,
Yeah,
I
that's the
mean, this
problem.
is. I mean, if they were to succeed in this would have enormous problem for rural hospitals, other places that expect to get reimbursed by Medicaid. For the various populations who might be cut out in this, a confected work requirement. So, that has an effect on, rural hospitals, which are also right in the MAGA zone, which is going to lead them to lay off more people. I mean, you're also going to get rid of some of the jobs for exactly that low income population. that needs it. So you're going to create a vicious cycle here.
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
you go through with this, and as you've pointed out in your explainer in the Washington Monthly YouTube channel, and we have a piece up today by Tom Walsh, who's involved with healthcare in Vermont, that this has a bad cycle effect, and it hasn't worked well in the states that have tried it, and it's really not a great idea with this population. Um, and I think the Democrats are right to stand firm against it and not get, bullied into seeing this as, kind of welfare reform redux. This is a very different kind of thing. And, I think Medicaid affects so many families, not just lower income, but, because it's become the nursing home of choice for elderly Americans. Medicare doesn't cover long-term care. Medicaid does. So the way of death and retirement in America, frankly, is that most people will at some point spend down their resources, become Medicaid eligible, and then they'll go to a nursing home that Medicaid will help pay. I think that frightens lots of younger people. I think it frightens lots of retirees. The idea that you're cutting back that program, and it's no luxury program. So I think
Mhm.
Democrats are right to stick to their guns on this.
Yeah. And I think I don't know where the contours of the bill are right now, Bill. Maybe you know, but my understanding is that they want to use the work requirements to tighten the work requirements also on food assistance, SNAP,
Right.
and
Yep.
a large number of people in the military rely on SNAP.
Mhm.
So
And
accusing,
there's creating bureaucratic red tape. It's not even saying you're not, in that case that you're not eligible. They're just making it harder for you to get it.
hmm
Uh,
hmm
and Mike Johnson, the numbers he used: 1.4 undocumented, 4.8 so-called able-bodied people. That gets you to 6.2. What the Congressional Budget Office estimated is a loss of 8.6 million. And Mike Johnson hasn't really accounted for where all that comes from. There's a
right.
gap there of about
Right.
2.5 million. They doesn't say, well, why are they getting kicked off? And what my guess is that it's just the bureaucratic red tape that the CBO is estimating is going to make it harder for people to get the benefits they are actually eligible to get. Uh, so it's
Yeah.
still a political grenade for Republicans that people like Murkowski and Collins and Josh Hawley, mind you, who's not hardly a moderate, but he's been very vocal. This is bad for Republicans and bad for working class Americans. So so there's that opening for Democrats. And forgive me, I don't want to keep yabbering if you want to go into something else, but also just the mere fact that this is a deficit buster. This is in no way
hmm
now it's not even deficit neutral. It's not deficit reduction. It's increasing the deficit. That is definitely making certain Republicans uncomfortable. And if Democrats push it hard, you may think it's still a tough bet to actually kill the bill. But if you want to give people like Rand Paul and Ron Johnson and the Freedom Caucus guys to pause, if that is what's top of mind of folks, that might be one way to get there.
hmm hmm Yeah, our national debt stands at over $36 trillion right now, and one of the casualties, Peter Orszag actually pointed this out in an op-ed in the New York Times, but this year we're spending 14% of the federal budget just on paying interest on the national debt. And about a third of this debt is actually held by foreign creditors, and if they lose faith in us, and we're ending up paying more on higher interest rates the higher our debt goes, and that's part of the reason we got the credit downgrade. um, they have a point. Cutting Medicaid is not the way to do it. Maybe cutting, not renewing all those tax cuts from 2017 might be the better way to get our fiscal house in order.
I mean, that's certainly. I don't know if it gets you all the way there, but obviously, if
It would help.
reducing debt, lowering deficits, trying to avoid any kind of spike in interest rates, uh, if that was your primary concern, you would almost certainly let the tax cuts expire because that's where you that would take you a long way there. And this is where Republicans are very squeezed because they feel they have to extend those tax cuts and they want to add to them. That goes in the wrong direction in terms of debt deficit are concerned.
hmm
Right. And these interest rate gyrations, in the bond market are really, Trump's trade schizophrenia is really not helping the interest rates that we're paying. They do these treasury auctions periodically to sell our bonds. And what's happening is people aren't buying unless they're being offered a much higher interest rate than usual. So Trump's actions are really causing trouble here.
And this is, I mean, if this bill was to actually go down, and I grant that's not the bet one would make politically, but if it was to happen, it would be because uh, inflation really starts to hit hard. The tariffs really start to kick in. They haven't really quite kicked in yet. We're in late May. We'll see. Uh, and if the bond market is elevated right now, we have higher yields on 30-year treasuries. If that spikes further, Matt was saying maybe that's priced in. It's not going to spike further. Could well be, even though it's elevated. It's not crazy. But mortgage rates are going up.
Hmm.
There is a pinch being felt there. But if it gets more dramatic, more acute, uh, if it's being felt in daily lives and that drags down Trump's approval rating, and now maybe my political fate's not entwined with your political fate. That's the ingredients you'd want to see. You'd have to say, I think, for this bill to actually die, and we're not quite there yet. So the Freedom Caucus said, you know what, I'm going to stick with Trump. If that goes south over the next couple months, maybe it's a different story.
Hmm. Okay, so the other interesting thing that happened was Putin and Ukraine. So after having been Putin's best friend forever, it seems Donald Trump is calling Putin crazy, and with all sorts of implications for what's happening with Ukraine. Bring us up to speed, and what do you make of this? Is it an about face
A
for
little
Trump?
bit, a little bit. Look, he's every for whatever reason, whatever's causing it. He has been very close to Putin for the last 9 years, and has been a very talking up Putin, supportive of Putin, complimentary of Putin, while he's been clobbering our allies. Make of that what you will. I think there was always, though, a limit on how far Putin could push him on Ukraine. I mean, Trump wants the war over. He wants to be seen as a peacemaker. He reportedly, wants a Nobel Prize. Feels like he was ripped off. Didn't get one for the Abraham Accords. Wants one here. And I think Putin's in your face, launch of so many drone and missile strikes after Trump, kept telling him publicly not to, I think has pushed it too far. Now, is the relationship such that Trump will still pull out, withdraw American support for Ukraine, and still, for all practical purposes, remain allied with Russia in this war? I don't know, but I think Putin has obviously made the calculation that it's more important to make battlefield progress than it is to tamp things down and try to go for a negotiated settlement. So, I think it's wise that the Ukrainians are not burning bridges here either with Trump. That they're much as Trump critics have said, how can people bend the knee to Trump and bow to him? I think the Ukrainians are clearly doing their best to show some deference, even while they don't give up, their basic claims in this war. But I think they've been wise to continue to court him, even after that crazy event in the Oval Office a couple of months ago now, where the vice president and the president publicly chastised, Zelensky in the Oval Office live on camera, in kind of a stunning moment. And I think Ukrainians and whoever they're paying as lobbyists, I think, have been wise to try to keep this going, and it's having some effect in the Republican conference. Chuck Grassley, the most senior, in terms of longevity, pro tem president of the Senate, who's was saying, "Hey, look, let's get some sanctions going on Russia after this." And so, I think that's emboldening the hawkish wing of the Republicans.
Hmm.
So, we'll see how this plays out.
I mean, I see this as not so much Trump, you know, uh, having a real rift with Putin, more of like a family
Don't
disagreement.
or also don't embarrass me. You know.
Yeah, right. I'm sure Trump would like the ribbon cutting and the peace prize.
Hmm.
And he's not wholly on the same page with Putin in that regard, because Putin is willing to, fight on. I mean, I don't know what would it take for Putin to actually stop, but uh, I think it's probably genuine that they're not quite in sync, and that's why you have some open disagreement. But I don't think you're going to get to a place where Trump has had it with Putin and he's going to throw in his lot with Ukraine and
Yeah,
Zelensky.
we're not going back to the Biden administration. No.
Yeah, one of the scenarios is Trump says Putin's too crazy, therefore I'm going to pull out of Ukraine completely and let them fight it out, as opposed to I'm going to. I'm not saying that's a guarantee. He could keep it going in this kind of low grade way, and maintain the status quo. But I don't think you would see Trump, ramp up military intervention on behalf of Ukraine as a result of anything that Putin does. I think it's just a question of Trump trying to get Putin to see things his way and get to the actual deal, because Trump likes the deal. But it doesn't mean like he's not going to tilt American foreign policy towards Russia the way he has been from the get-go.
Hmm. Hmm. So the another large event for Trump this weekend, he had a very busy Memorial Day weekend, was his meme coin dinner. As everyone recalls, he had this contest where the top 22 holders of his Trump meme coin would get a personal dinner with him at his golf course out in Virginia. That happened on Friday with protests galore. Um, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like there is less outrage than one would expect. In fact, I think there was actually a New York Times analysis that says, Trump has already normalized all this stuff, and so you're not seeing as much outrage, compared to past presidents, where even tiny transgressions would have brought down the wrath of Congress and various
Right.
special prosecutors and all of that. Do you guys agree with that analysis? And if so, why is the American public turning out to be so tolerant of this kind of just open corruption?
Well, they do become inured to it. The more you get away with it and the more you're able to do it, people do get a little numb. And I think it's the whole sort of, shock and awe, or, flood the zone strategy. I think it's hard to, keep people's wrath when there's so much of it. But I think Bill has written eloquently about how corruption in the long run is a real weakness for Trump, and an opening for Democrats.
Yeah, I wouldn't assume that just because you're not getting the intense media frenzy around it, that means the average person is accepting of it, and that there's no way Democrats could successfully draw attention to it. When you get closer to election day. I mean, there's some media coverage about it. It's not zero. Of the things that have sort of broken through, it's sort of in the top 10 of things that in a given week. But I was looking at this Mike Johnson transcript again from Sunday on CNN. Jake Tapper did push him on this point a little bit. Maybe could have pushed harder, but did push some. And Tapper to sort of ask him the hypocrisy question. You oversaw a congressional investigation of President Biden's ties to Hunter's questionable business dealings. You seem to think it was your responsibility to look at this sort of thing then. And then Johnson said, you hear the whole Biden crime family bit, saying the president lied about his involvement in business dealings. Of course, the evidence just piled up. Of course, this is all nonsense. And then he goes on to say, the difference, of course, is that President Trump does everything out in the open. He's not trying to hide anything. There's no shell companies or fake LLCs or fake family businesses. Of course, that just glides to the fact that there's only one presidential family business that has been literally convicted of fraud, and that is the Trump organization. And the fact that you're doing crypto quid pro quos out in the open is hardly exonerating. So I mean but that this does, I think, dull the immediate media frenzy potential because they are sort of shrugging it off, and Democrats are in a position where they have to pick their targets and they can't attack everything all at once. But don't be surprised if this still lingers in the Democratic toolkit for things to talk about, come election time.
Mhm.
Right. Especially if things are going south and the economy and other things are going wrong, then Democrats can, add the he's enriching himself argument to, you know, all his policies.
While other people are losing healthcare coverage
Exactly.
and
You're
food
losing your
assistance
health care
and
coverage. Grandma's not getting their Medicaid, people are getting kicked off the rolls. Right, exactly. And he's creating his own currency.
you know,
They're just
well, I mean,
backing the truck up.
it's quite an argument from Mike Johnson that open corruption is somehow better than, closet corruption. But be that as it may. So as long as we're on this topic of Democrats looking for purchase on this administration, there was an interesting article in the Washington Post this weekend about how some Democrats are blaming the language that they use for their political failures back to the old question of it's the messaging. So um, the lead in this article says that some Democrats are upset about the use of the word oligarchs instead of rich people, or referring to people experiencing food insecurity rather than Americans going hungry, or equity in place of equality, justice involved populations instead of prisoners. What do you make of this internal argument among Democrats? How much does it matter on the messaging front? And do Democrats sound, in fact, too pointy head and elitist? And is that a big reason why they're failing to get traction with the working class voters that they lost last election?
Well, I think yes and no. I mean, I think some language that Democrats have become comfortable with, I don't think serve them as well politically. I think persons of color, communities of color, as phrases, may have legitimacy as a taxonomy of people. But it elides the fact that most Hispanics don't think of themselves as blacks, and those that do, have a distinct identity. And Mexicans don't think of themselves the same way as Cubans or Afro-Cubans, and so I think they have used language. And Ruben Gallego, kind of famously said when a couple of cycles back, asked, what he thought of the use of the word Latinx, and he said, "Don't use Latinx. Just don't
Yeah.
use it. This is something that only 3% of Hispanics use. This is not helping matters." On the other hand, James Garfield made a big fuss that AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Bernie Sanders were having an oligarch tour, and he kept saying, "No one knows what an
Yeah.
oligarch is. Just say fat cat." Um, I'm not sure that's really a problem either. So, some language is not helpful, but others, it's not really the problem here.
I mean, there are plenty. In the 80s, Democrats used words like poor and hungry and fat cat. It doesn't mean that that Michael Dukakis became president of the United States. Bernie Sanders spends a lot of time talking about millionaires and billionaires. That's very plain language. It doesn't mean Bernie Sanders could waltz into the White House anytime soon. So, some of the stuff, the Latinx thing, I get that critique more. And I think Diego, obviously had the credibility to make the point that this isn't becoming language that regular people use. There are certain things. There's language always evolves. And there was a time where people didn't say African American. Now it's said pretty regularly, and I don't think it rankles the ear when somebody says it. Um, and often that can be driven from activist circles or academic circles. Sometimes it sticks and sometimes it doesn't. There clearly was some kind of push on Latinx, and it didn't really stick. And frankly, I don't see anybody using it now. So it's not really it's not even
Yeah.
like a thing that is becoming a problem for Democrats. That argument was kind of made last year and was resolved. Uh, so there's always a challenge, no matter where you are on the political spectrum. If you're in political office, there's always a certain lingo and jargon that gets used by people who are on the inside, and you always have to kind of be mindful of it and make sure you're not losing touch with the way regular people speak. It's always a little bit of a tightrope, uh, and uh, and Democrats should be mindful of it as they're trying to reconnect with the broader public, whether it is like the thing that's holding them back, right, or that held them back. Excuse me, in 2024, I don't think so, and I don't think it's nearly
Hmm.
as big of an issue as the water that Donald Trump is unloading on Republicans by blowing up the economy.
Right,
Yeah, I
right.
mean, when you have a president goes to a West Point commencement and starts talking about trophy wives, who's got the language problem?
Right. And certainly Democrats probably shouldn't let this debate over language get in the way of the more important debate about ideas, which ultimately are going to carry
No,
the day.
no,
Right.
absolutely. I mean, I think the problems with the traditionally Democratic allied groups that they've been seeing an erosion of support from, especially younger Hispanic males, also African American males who are younger. That's a project they've obviously got to work on in a way that doesn't sound like they're academics, but it involves more than just rhetoric. It involves policy and outreach and other things.
Hmm. Hmm. And Trump escalated the class war again over the weekend as well, not only with his um, renewed threats against Harvard, but then this morning, I think it was to use the $3 billion he's says he's taking away from Harvard
Right.
and giving it to trade schools. So that
Well,
was an
this
interesting
is
move.
it is an interesting move, and I think there are Democrats like the Washington State Representative Marie Gluesenkamp Perez who have made a big deal about vocational education. I think kind of that's actually kind of an issue. Um, so I think he may be hitting a political nerve about that, but you know as a factual matter, the billions that Harvard gets is not going to the Porcellian Club or the Harvard University Polo Club or the crew team. It's not going to rich people. It's mostly going for things like scientific research and other things the federal government has enthusiastically funded under Republican Democratic administrations since World War II. So the idea that he's sticking it to the rich by taking money from Harvard is it may be something he can do something with politically, but it's bullshit.
And the other thing that they have to be a little careful about is the push for an endowment tax,
Hmm.
which sounds like it's just going to hit the uber lefties at the Harvards and the Yales, but there is a tier of colleges below that that would also get hit, and plenty of them are in red states. So uh, whether it survives in the reconciliation bill or not, I don't know, but uh, don't be surprised if you start seeing local coverage about these issues where people realize that's going to affect their local communities. I mean, and colleges in red states that actually that are embedded in their communities and are part of their local economies. If you start seeing some squawking there about what the impact is going to be, it make Republicans think twice about the push that they're doing.
Hmm. Yeah, I might be wrong, but I think I actually even saw an item in Playbook, political Playbook, that Hillsdale College is opposed to the uber conservative, college is opposed to the endowment tax because they actually have a reasonably large endowment relative to the size of their population, and they would be hurt by this.
Exactly. It's
Exactly.
they may want to try to write the bill in such a way that it would. They list the colleges that get hit, and they skip the ones that don't. But I think that probably wouldn't pass
That would
constitutional
invite a
muster.
lawsuit. That would
Yeah,
definitely invite a lawsuit. 14th Amendment, equal protection.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I mean, do Americans have problems with some aspects of higher ed? I'm sure they do. Do they basically have utter and complete contempt for colleges? I don't think so. I think this is a sort of playing to his base. Talk about an echo chamber. I think this is something that plays well with hard, diehard insiders and Republicans, but I just don't think this is a huge winning issue across the board. I mean, people still see higher education as a ladder of opportunity.
I mean,
Mhm.
I suspect that the driving motivation here is that they know that the higher educated you are, and this is just numbers right now. I'm not saying it has to be this way for all of time, but as it stands, the more higher educated you are, the more likely you're voting Democrat. Uh,
Well, no question. This is sort of the Maoist, approach. It used to. We have a forthcoming piece about this, but it used to be that sort of there was an idea of defunding the left that was popular in the Reagan administration,
Mhm.
where you
Mhm.
took after things like the Legal Services Corporation, which gave poor people access to engage in some proactive litigation, and and Karl Rove in the aughts was very eager to push tort reform as a way of kind of defunding trial lawyers who had become a big financial base for the Democratic Party. But now they've so expanded the category of enemies of the state in sort of cultural revolution fashion that like universities writ large, right, from are now seen as breeding grounds of heresy and you know counter-revolutionary thought. So they've taken a very they've taken a meat axe to what other Republican administrations had seen as a fairly or not as a surgical problem.
Right.
I mean, now it includes science, right? It includes cancer researchers. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of nuts. What is nuts? It's not kind of nuts.
The final question for you guys, as always, what else are you looking for this week?
I mean, we're sort of. I mean, I guess I'm still watching. How the Senate's going to react to reconciliation. That's sort of the next stage of this process because the House passed their bill, and we got a little bit of a taste of it on the Sunday shows. Um, are they going? Are we going to start seeing some real red lines being drawn, or is it going to be a similar kind of kabuki that they give us enough wiggle room to land the plane eventually?
Yeah, well, I think Supreme Court's interesting to watch. We're going into the end of its term
Mm.
in June. There's some decisions we're waiting for, but it's kind of operating like night court these days. It's not just the months long scheduled arguments, and then we know that they'll offer their Solomonic, pronouncement in June, and now they're getting things coming in 24/7, and it is like night court. So, all of these things that are being litigated about government layoffs and defunding universities and shutting down agencies, it continues to, land, awash on the shores of Maryland Avenue, where the court is. And I think the last month could be kind of wild.
Well, thanks very much, guys. And we're going to be taking a break next week, so we see the week after that. This has been the Washington Monthly Politics live stream. I'm Ann Kim, joined today by politics editor Bill Scher and executive editor for digital Matt Cooper. If you like what you've seen, don't forget to share, to like, and subscribe. And please check out our website, WashingtonMonthly.com. All right, everyone, have a great week.